Good evening, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. My name is Julia Buntemine, and I'm a member of the JFK Junior Forum Committee here at the Institute of Politics. Before we begin, note the exit doors, which are located on both the park side and the JFK street side of the forum. In the event of an emergency, please gather your belongings, walk to the exit closest to you, and congregate in the JFK Park. Please also take a moment to silence your cell phones. You can join the conversation tonight online by tweeting with the hashtag #AIForum, which is also listed in your program. Tonight's events will begin shortly. Please take your seats now and enjoy the program.
Good afternoon. My name is Juliette Kayyem. I'm on the faculty here at the Kennedy School of Government, and I want to welcome you all. I doubted the Institute of Politics would fill a room at 4 o'clock on a Friday, and I am glad to be wrong about that. It's an important topic. Before we begin, I am going to do a shout out because Juliette, the other Juliette who you just met, her parents are here, so we want to welcome them, I heard. This event is also co-sponsored by the student group, the Future Society of the Kennedy School, and the AI initiative within it. If you want to learn more about the Future Society, it's futuresociety.org. And I want to thank them for their subject matter expertise and helping me and the Institute of Politics with such an amazing day. So before I get to the panelists, I just want to set the conditions of this discussion. As many of you, of my students are in the room, know, I come from a background of Homeland Security and counterterrorism. So what am I doing here? The reason why is because AI is impacting every facet of our society, specifically on security issues, whether it's migration or global warming or hurricanes or anything else that you can think about that's impacting security. But there are other issues to think about when we think about AI. I mean, part of what AI is about, the capacity to learn and do better, whether robots or whatever else can do that. And that's something that we think about in terms of the human condition in crisis or national security and foreign policy. But I think the most important reason why I'm here and so interested in this issue, and for those of you who are not AI experts, is that the world is going through dramatic tectonic shifts that are occurring in the world that are impacting our relationships to each other. Right? Whether it involves national security or climate change or AI, there is these changes are impacting the way communities relate to each other. And there is, for better or for worse, a deep sense of loss by people, and it gets played out. We see it in politics, we see it in our relationships to each other, and I think those tensions are real, and they have to be discussed in conversations about AI and its meaning for us and for those of you who are much younger, who are going to be really at the forefront of what's happening with AI. So with those words, I want to first introduce our amazing panel. I'm going to begin with Professor Ed Felten, right to my left, is the Deputy U.S. Chief Technology Officer at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Recently, Ed co-chaired the White House initiative on preparing for the future of AI. We're going to actually begin with that in a moment. He is on leave from Princeton University, where he is the Robert E. Kahn Professor of Computer Science and Public Affairs, and also the founding director of Princeton Center for Information Technology Policy. In 2011, in previous government service, he served as the chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission. David Kenny is general manager of IBM Watson Cognitive Computing. When computing power meets human-like capacity to speak, see, reason, and learn, is one of the techno-scientific breakthroughs IBM is investing in. It could significantly impact fields like medicine and how patients are diagnosed. David, before this, was chairman and CEO of the Weather Company, and prior to that, he served as president of a well-known company here, Akamai, the leading cloud platform designed to provide secure and seamless experiences to internet users. Next to him is Professor Rosalind Picard, Picard is the founder and director of the Affective, I'm sure I said that wrong, Computing Research Group at the MIT Media Lab, and co-directs the Media Lab's Advancing Wellbeing Initiative. She co-founded Empatica Inc., which creates wearable sensors and analytics to improve health, as well as Affectiva Inc., delivering technology to help measure and communicate emotions. She did ask me if I wanted my blood pressure tested during this, and I didn't. She is a pioneer in the field of affective computing, a prolific innovator and inventor. And then finally, this is quite an amazing crowd, David Parks is the Gordon McKay Professor of Computer Science at Harvard University, where he teaches classes in artificial intelligence, optimization, and multi-agent systems. He was awarded the NSF Career Award in 2002 and the Alfred P. Sloan Fellowship in 2005. Parks is an editor of Games and Economic Behavior and serves several editorial boards. And David, which we'll get into this report, is one of the co-authors of the AI 100 study out of Stanford University. So let's first thank them all. And I want to begin for being here. Ed, I want to begin with you because I want to set the stage for the audience in terms of what's going on in the federal level. The report has recently come out that was really a roadmap in many ways for the years ahead, and in particular federally support for AI research. Could you say a little bit more about the findings and the process and how the government is thinking about this transformation for society?
Sure. So the administration put out the report on October 12th. It's called Preparing for the Future of AI. You can find it online. And this was the result of a months-long process involving people from across the government. We held 5 public workshops around the country, had a call for written comments, lots of meetings and discussions across government. So we tried to get input very broadly, including from the expert community. The report itself starts in a very optimistic place long-term about what AI can do. That AI is one of the most important technology transformations that we will see. People say it may be bigger than mobile computing, maybe as important long-term as the internet. To give you an example of the kind of impact that it has and the role that it may play in attacking a lot of really important questions that we face as a society and a world. But in order to reap those benefits, there are a bunch of issues or challenges that we need to work through. And much of the report is talking through those challenges. And so now I get to see if I can remember the list. The report talks about how government can use AI and how government needs to be set up and recruit personnel and so on in order to use AI effectively in doing all of its missions better. It talks about issues of research and development, how we should think about AI R&D, and how it should be funded and supported, organized. There's discussion about issues of fairness and justice and non-discrimination in the application of AI. As we take important decisions about people and they get made either by AI systems or with the help of AI systems, for example, think about decisions that judges make about sentencing or bail for criminal defendants. If those decisions are being made with the help of AI-based analysis tools, how can we be sure that those are fair? How can we be sure that they actually work and make decisions which are justified? There's a set of issues around diversity of the AI workforce. How can we make sure that we're putting the whole team on the field as a nation and as a field? There are issues as well around, there are big issues around the impact on the economy. There are concerns about AI creating changes in the job market. And that's one of the issues that we actually decided to do a separate follow-on report about, which which is expected by the end of the year. And then finally, there are some issues around national security. One of those, for example, has to do with the use of AI in weapons systems. And both what is the responsible thing for our military to be doing in terms of developing and using these systems, how should we think about that, as well as how should we think about the possible threats that come from others' use of the technology. So that's a pretty big basket of issues, and the report sort of walks through those and gives what we hope is a useful framework for thinking about each one.
In terms, I'm going to just follow up with each of them before we open up to questions at about 4:40. The decision, and I should remind everyone, President Obama co-edited or guest-edited Wired magazine with a long discussion about AI. And one of the things he said, which is linked to the sort of decision to do the jobs issue maybe later, is the real notion that that our workforce will change dramatically, not because of immigration, but actually because of displacement or replacement. For people concerned about that, it's a real issue, and the economic inequality that exists in the United States today. How should we think about that in terms of the frameworks that are guiding the second part?
Well, I mean, that's a really interesting question, and it's a big enough question for a separate report. Yeah. But here are some things I think we know. First of all, technology has been changing the economy, changing the job market for a long time, and that has accelerated in recent years. And so one possible way to look at what AI and automation are doing is that they're accelerating those changes that have been happening. And so those are changes like changes in the rate of labor force participation, changes in the wage distribution as a function of income, as a function of education or of different job categories, issues of churn in the job market with some jobs going away, other jobs being created, which creates pain and dislocation for people. All of those things have been happening, and one of the open questions is AI going to speed that up, or is this time different? And is this going to be a different kind of economic transition than we've seen before? And so a lot of economists have been looking at these issues, trying to figure out what we can tell from the data that's available and the models that are available. But that really tees up then a whole set of policy questions about how we think about the social safety net, how we think about training and education, and so on.
Thanks. So, David, the rise of IBM Watson over the years has been amazing. I heard you say inside you're leading it now as of this year. And it's really nested at the core of the global practice and also sort of the linkages between the public and private sectors. And so without disclosing secrets of IBM, I think it'd be helpful for the audience to hear about some of the practical applications that IBM Watson is thinking about, and how you think it might transform major sectors in our society, in particular healthcare or health delivery systems or wherever else that you were focused on.
I mean, so we are focused on the commercial applications. We're the only big platform that's really around, that started with business versus started with consumer. And so our focus has been, lots of people, you can talk to Siri, you can talk to Alexa, you can talk to Watson. Behind it, the data we've been focused on is the data that hasn't been put onto the public internet, to really be able to learn that to make decisions. So a lot of corporate data is being used in that way, a lot of health data. And fundamentally, the early stages are that it does the repeatable things to free up the human mind to do more advanced things, and that's evolving it. So just one example, last week I met with the head of genomics at the University of Tokyo. If you wanted to keep up with the genomics literature as an oncologist, just on genomics for cancer, it would take you 28 hours per day to read everything that's published, and you would have to read in all languages. And that's just impossible. And he pointed out it was taller than Mount Fuji to read the available data. But Watson can. So he gave the story of a patient who came in. She was 66. She'd had leukemia for 6 years, AML. They had not found the answer. They ran her DNA through Watson, and it found the rare cases that said she actually didn't have this form. She had one strain over. They found exactly where in her DNA to target. She's healthy. They solved a lot of it, but this really helped read all the literature and get them focused on the right problem. And I think the faster we get people to the right decisions, I use health because it's a place we're in a race against time. We're in a race against time on the climate. We're in a race against time on homeland security. We're in a race against time against terrorism. So we're in a race against time. Companies are against each other for innovation. So when you've got a race against time, if this can take all the research basic functions off your plate so that you're solving problems, it's going to make human capacity much, much stronger.
And that's true for all different fields. I want, how is IBM Watson, how are you thinking though about the balance between AI and what in the literature, the human touch or intuition or just those things that we want to believe as humans aren't necessarily, are unique to us. In security, for example, you can try to process all sorts of data or whatever, but sometimes it just takes, sort of being in the room and knowing what's going on. So just how are you balancing those two aspects?
Well, we spend a lot of time on the human factors. We don't have it all. It's part of why we work with folks like the Media Lab to sort that out. And we tend to think about it as augmented intelligence, not artificial, that it doesn't live on its own. But I also think that the humans need to be retrained to really do the hard stuff. So everything that can be done simply can be done by others. And it's using a lot of fields that you would historically have thought of as creative. So another example is this guy, Alex DeKidd in the UK, used Watson to decide what music and harmonization and things people wanted. He actually composed a song with Watson as one of his collaborators. It's now, in 1 week, number 14. It's rising up the charts, 1 on Spotify. It's an awesome song called Not Easy, and designed by AI. So even in those fields, if you're willing to trust the algorithms to help you with the basics, you could spend all your time on innovation.
Raz, I want to turn to you. If you could explain to us what David was just, what is affective computing and how this approach of AI can help solve sort of big social problems. I mean, you're an innovator and an entrepreneur, and helping the audience sort of understand what exactly is at the aspects that are at the forefront of AI right now.
Mm-hmm. Sure. First of all, it's kind of amusing to hear affective computing with an A pronounced effective computing. Actually, we hoped it would be confused. When I originally coined it, Nicholas Negroponte said, nicely confused with effective, which is good. Because in the beginning, it was, I was trying to avoid the word emotion, which we all thought meant it would be reckless and irrational. And what we realized is we're all full of emotion when we're being rational. So we needed to understand how that worked and how to take technology and bring the skills of emotional intelligence to it. So I defined affective computing as computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences emotion. And now today it has grown into a huge area where there are a lot of companies taking versions of it to market. An example is Affective, taking facial expressions out so that if you're getting ready to put out a video of, that's intended to be educational, and you can see from it that 80% of the viewers are just kind of doing this after about 2 minutes in the video, and then their eyes are doing this, or they're smiling at the right places, or they're synchronized with it, then you can get feedback of where you're really connecting with your audience, and that's valuable to quantify. When it comes to larger social issues, right now, an active research project that I'm engaged in is where we're taking the physiology of affect that we're measuring from people, as well as the affect they get from interacting with smartphones, so wearable sensors, smartphones, social interaction, our sleep, our stress, and many other things about our health. And we're putting that together and trying to do what was done for weather 150 years ago, where people thought you were nuts if you said you could predict that a hurricane was coming. And now we think we can predict the equivalent of affective storms and changes in our health. And not only predict them and forecast them, but do something we can't do with weather. Identify the variables that we could change so that you would know and I would know, and these might be different things we would identify, what to change to keep a hardworking young employee who's really pushing himself or herself from falling down the decline of depression. Or becoming sick, or having comorbid depression with heart disease or diabetes or other conditions. So as we start to understand and quantify that emotional aspect and not just recognize it, but forecast it and identify the components that trigger it, we think we could do things like prevent 80% of depression from happening in the first place. And that would derail what's currently projected to be the #1 disease burden by 2030, more than cancer, war, and accidents and stroke.
Now, when I was reading about your work, my understanding is you're also doing a lot of work, if you could just explain, with autism, which is an issue right now. Can you just explain a little bit, because I think also parents in the room and would love to hear about how AI, I wouldn't have thought of that before, but how AI and autism would join forces. Right?
Yeah, actually, just about every project in my lab right now grew out of working with people on the autism spectrum. It's been amazingly insightful to learn from them and with them. It started when I was trying to build a robot that could recognize emotions, and one day a young man showed up in my office to borrow a map back in the days when they weren't digital and we had to have them on paper. And he said, what do you work on? I said, I'm giving computers the ability to recognize emotion. And he said, oh, could you help my brother? And I said, well, tell me about your brother. And I started to learn that many people on the autism spectrum are nonverbal, they have nonverbal learning disability. In fact, actually many people in computer science also have this problem. Many of my colleagues would look at my feet, they'd look at my feet and say, why are you working on emotion? So we started to build stuff to help people with these, who needed improvements in these skills. And then one day, a young woman on the autism spectrum who typed to talk spoke to me, typing, augmented technology for her speech, and said, you've got it all wrong, Roz. Working on helping me recognize other people's emotions is not my biggest problem. My biggest problem is you're not recognizing my emotions. And at first I took that kind of personally. And I said, okay, I know I have room to improve. What am I missing? And she says, it's not just you, it's everybody. Everybody's not recognizing our emotions accurately. And I started to learn that the stress and the anxiety that many people on the autism spectrum were experiencing was not communicated outwardly in the same way that many of us communicated every day to our spouses and loved ones and all. And so they were often being very misunderstood. So we started to then build wearables that could augment that and help them be better understood.
That's great. And David, you are one of the co-authors, or one of the authors of the AI 100 Years Perspective, or the AI 100, it wasn't 100 years, study done by Stanford University. And we talk a lot about the convergence between computer science and neuroscience as one of the main factors of AI progress, and what we can anticipate in the coming decades. Could you throw some light for us non-experts and those in the room and say more on what we can expect in the coming decades? Because it seems like an incredibly vibrant field right now.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. It's actually really interesting now in 2016 when we reflect back. It was 1956 when the field was founded, and it's amazing to me that we're sat here today talking about the policy implications of AI. I think probably quite a few of you think about AI as a machine learning problem, and one point that I wanted to make is that it's much more than that. We need to be able to perceive our environment, so we need to be able to look around and understand what we're seeing. I see faces, I see a screen, I see lights, I see walls. But we also need to be able to reason. We need to be able to reason about how to act. And then we need to act in an uncertain environment. And I think the minds and the brain are useful in some ways. One is they give us an existence proof that this is possible. They give us potentially ideas for how we can engineer systems that can achieve this AI capability that we've been dreaming about now for a long time. And they give us benchmarks. They give us something to shoot for. One of the things that's been a really hard problem now for many years has been this problem of how to go from raw inputs. So imagine taking the pixels on an image that represent this room, and with nothing more than that, automatically understanding the features of that image, and then using those features to understand what the objects are in the image. And there's been advances in recent years using ideas that have been coming inspiration out of the neuroscience field. And these are ideas that are about having multiple layers of a nonlinear function from inputs into outputs. This was an idea. This idea of using neural networks was around in the 80s. It was discarded in the 90s. It was rediscovered in the 2000s, and has been found to be very, very effective. Initially inspired again by observations as to how people must learn. We must learn from unsupervised data. It's not like when we grow up or we're a baby in our environment that our parents are telling us all the time, yeah, they do at some point say, that's a cat, that's a dog, that's a flower, but there's a long period of time when we're just observing. And so the question was, how can you, without labeling data, how can AI learn? And Hinton and his colleagues in the mid-2000s showed how to do that. And that led to considerable advances. So at this point, we have an algorithmic approach that has provided the same approach, essentially, has provided the state-of-the-art methods for natural language understanding, for vision, and other problems that have been long-standing, challenging problems. But we don't know the algorithm that is used by the brain. There's no grand unifying theory. We're not at the point where we know how to build AI systems in general. Looking forward, I think that one of the things that I hope and expect we'll get from thinking about the connection with neuroscience is we'll understand architectures. We'll understand how to reflect, how to use computation, when to think, when not to think, when to use a very simple rule-based approach using pattern matching versus deliberation. I think it's quite likely that advances in cognitive neuroscience will lead to an increasing understanding of the way the brain is doing this. When are we reasoning versus just using things that we've essentially learned? And that's an example of something that I really think that we should hope to get from neuroscience and use to improve the AI systems that we're building.
That's true. So thank you all. So this was a very optimistic view of AI. And so for the next round, I want to drill down a little bit on, you just type in AI. There are very well-known critics or people who raise a lot of concerns. And in the School of Public Policy, those are ones worth addressing. So, Ed, and all of you, actually, I'll just address that now, but all of you should feel free to answer any of these. Is it possible that we could be in the middle of a sort of AI arms race, right? That the idea that information and who has it and what country is better at it becomes a sort of reason for all sorts of bad things happening in the world, as we've seen. It's sort of the fight over resources. Why do wars begin? Because of the fight over resources and information. And AI exhibits, it seems to me, significant winners-take-all characteristics, right? The first to get it will have a strategic advantage over another, and is all pervasive. Planes, cars, weaponry, medicine, healthcare, public health, which creates the conditions of an AI race. So just, and that can be troublesome for some people thinking about geopolitics. So I'm asking you because you're in the White House, but anyone should feel free to answer that.
Sure. Well, so I think if you think about AI as a thing that you either have or don't have, then that may lead you into an arms race mindset. But I don't think AI is a thing you have or don't have. I think it's something that happens in degrees, number one. And number two, the development of AI has really been developed over time by a scientific community, a community of people who make advances here and there that, for the most part, important results in the field are published and get passed across, and it's more of a collaborative, worldwide community of people who have pushed it forward. Now, I think that's true with respect to the basic technologies. There's another piece of this that has to do with access to data. Because a lot of the progress in AI has come through machine learning, which is a method that, in which you start with often a very large data set, and then the computer machine learning algorithm will try to infer from that data set. Think of that data set as a set of examples of what the right answer is in a lot of different situations, and the machine will try to infer a rule for deciding based on that. And so that data itself may become valuable. And so questions about access to data, control over data, do become important, but those are not things that I think fall into exclusively into the hands of one nation or one society. So far, I think we've had a fairly multilateral, fairly open development of the technology. And certainly from a strategic standpoint, it makes a lot of sense to think about how to sustain that. And that's been the focus of a lot of our thinking.
Yeah, go back.
As it moves into the commercial realm, there absolutely are races.
Yeah.
And even the things we see in society, I'm not sure it's always tied to geography. And I think the whole notion of a nation is changing. There are good and bad forces in any nation. Good forces are collaborating, bad forces are collaborating. So I do think it's important that we understand the data, that it be left for good generally in society. In companies, of course, they're all global. I do think more savvy companies who look forward to what it means for them are understanding that the data is really important, and the algorithms and learning from that data is really important. It is part of their IP. You have to be very wary of it becoming commoditized and all in a couple of algorithms. So I do think, but I think the competition is good as it brings more people in. A diversity of learning and training is going to create a diversity of algorithms, and I think that's going to get better answers. What I worry about is laziness or expediency, having everybody adopt the first couple of programs and ending up seeing things consolidate on a couple of global platforms.
Yeah, on top of that, one of my worries with the race to data, everybody wants to own the data we collect. And I think we need to do more to empower the individuals who are providing the data and make sure, set some sort of value system where individuals benefit, not just the person who sort of owns the company who collects the data benefits, because there's a huge imbalance right now where a few powerful people who have access to all the data make a lot more money, get a lot more value out of it than the individuals who should be getting more of that value.
It's really important in health, right? So that we have systems that protect your health with things like HIPAA, but really they lock the data up.
Yeah.
And interesting, there are social medicine, because we work globally, systems where patients own their data more, and actually they can take better advantage of this faster. So I do think empowering individuals to own their data and to use it, trade it in an AI system is really important.
Although they don't necessarily have the technical ability to manage it. So this is where government and all, and society could step in and help build that neutral backbone so everybody's data is kind of under their individual control.
So another aspect is that I worry that the globalization of AI could be a problem in the sense that this is a commons, and one concern that I think AI researchers and developers have in places like the US is I think we will do things in a reasonable legal framework, and we will try to be careful to do the right things in regard to privacy and fairness and other issues that we might touch on today. But there's a worry that the same norms may not be respected overseas, and there's a worry that the AI good could somehow begin to be perceived, which I believe could somehow begin to be perceived as a bad because of bad actors internationally. So this is a little bit of a different take on the winner-take-all, but there's also just that regulation could lead, asymmetric regulation could be a problem.
Or just, and pushing, did you want to follow?
Yes, just quickly, I think there's also an important element here of where we should be thinking about how the technology is developed. Because often when we discuss these issues, we think in terms of the throttle. Should we turn the throttle up or down on the development of this technology? But we also have a steering wheel, and we have some ability to develop the technology in one way versus another, in a way that is more privacy friendly, or that does a better job of navigating the trade-offs, or simply gives us better control as individuals, or as a community over what happens.
So, David, I wanted to follow up on you. So discussing a legal framework or privacy issues, I think one of the, and you can call it hyper or whatever, one of the critiques or people get nervous about AI, or at least is this sense of loss of identity, right? That you want to give too much information is out there, and this nervousness about privacy. But I also think there's, and I don't maybe not be defining it perfectly, but this loss of humanity, the sense that there is something different about us, and both as a as someone who's looked at this issue, but thinking about a legal framework or rules of engagement for the future. In the study, how did you address that?
Yeah, these are very important questions. They're questions that I think are a great example where policy people need to come together with technologists. Privacy is a good example in the sense that we now have some ways to formally define privacy that can be helpful in some settings. Roughly, this says that I shouldn't learn, it's a formal way to say that I shouldn't learn anything from having access to your data, except in a very small probabilistic way. Now, privacy, and there are ways in which that definition is not successful, but privacy is just one aspect of who we are as society, and we're beginning to think about what it means to be fair, and obviously there are legal frameworks around what data should and should not be used for, and in regard to, say, loans. And I think it's leading to a very interesting dialogue, and I'm hopeful that it will end up in a nice place, in the sense that we will need to commit to ways to think about these trade-offs when we build our technology. And the current the laws right now are too broad strokes to really provide the right guidance, I think, for developing some of the technology that will be affecting us every day. So we have discussions about this in the report. We point to some of the technical developments. I think from a technological perspective, it's a trade-off. This is a constrained system. If society says that your AI should respect the following norms, then the implication will be that there'll be things that it won't be able to do because it's being constrained. And so we need to think about it in that framework, I think. But we had some ethicists as well in the loop, but it's hard to anticipate the humanity of these implications ultimately.
David, I want to turn to you. IBM is a big employer, you're a big company. Thinking just about the education systems that people coming into this field and the pace of automation today, right? Yeah. What do you want, and a lot of young people in the room, a lot of people interested in it, what do you, from your perspective, want to say to young Americans or anyone in the world who know they will probably have to retrain, rethink fundamentally several times over their careers as automation moves forward? It's just going to change the way we think about the workforce and our professions and issues like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think as students here, if you're studying public policy or you came over for the B school or you're in the medical school, everybody should get some basics on computer science because I think it's going to be important to understand it. And I think in the future, we're going to want to expose how we came to the inference we came to, or the recommendation we're giving, and you're actually going to want to be critical underneath it to assess it. So people need to do that generally. But this is a highly educated room. I would say, like every other technical innovation from the steam shovel, is first going to affect the mundane. And on one hand, I think that's great because I think, I come from a blue-collar job, first generation to go to college. Jobs are really important and they give us a great sense of purpose, but some jobs really are not fun. And I think the goal is the mundane can be automated so people can do more advanced things. But we do have to manage people through that transition, and we do need everybody to have the chance to do higher order, more intellectual things, because there is a lot of problems to be solved, but we need to sort of bring people along on that. So I think people need to educate themselves, but also I think we need to, as a global society, invest in educating so that the human capacity can really, and capability can rise, because the jobs that are going to remain are going to increasingly be higher order. is one. And I would say, secondly, all of us spend some of our time doing mundane things. Yeah. Those are going to disappear. I was thinking at the beginning, a really smart person explaining to us the exits. A robot can do that. And if a fire comes, a robot can do that. But the person is really smart, so every minute is then going to be spent on the more higher order things, right? And but we're going to get exhausted because we're going to have to be thinking all the time. So I think training ourselves to use our minutes well is something we all need to work on.
Well, I definitely want to get to the audience, but I want to do one last round robin, and I'll start at the far end. What's the greatest misperception about AI right now? I mean, in other words, what would you want to say to people listening?
I would say, so in the AI 100 report, one phrase that has really stuck with me is that you can't take AI and pour it as if you're pouring out of a pitcher. We don't have that kind of AI. The AI that we have requires years of research and development. It's not like you add it, like you add water. That's a misperception.
I keep thinking of this sort of fait accompli that we're going to have the HAL or the monolithic AI that, as Marvin Minsky said, we'll build the machine that's so vastly superior to us that we'll be lucky if it keeps us around as a household pet. And there's sort of that idea that, right, that's just gonna happen, and it's just gonna evolve, and it's just natural. And what I think people who don't build these things may not realize is that it's people like me sitting there in the lab on a Friday afternoon, going back there and saying, gee, what do I want to build? And I don't want to build the AI that keeps me, at the end of my deathbed that says, my kids all were made into household pets, right? So we need people to talk about what we want built. It's not a fait accompli. It's not going to just become this, thing we're all scared of in the movies unless we, don't speak out about what we really want.
So that's one. I would say the other is that there's a misperception it's all happening in Silicon Valley. That's the center of it. It really isn't. They're happening with some good universities in walking distance that are doing great computer science and around the world. There's great stuff happening in Europe. There's amazing things happening in Japan. This is really a truly global phenomenon. It tends to be in the more wealthier nations because they've got the computing capacity. But it's not all naturally centered in the big consumer engines of Silicon Valley.
I guess the one thing I would say is that AI is not a single thing. It's not the case that we're building an intelligence that is just like ours and may someday be just like us, only more so. Really what AI has been is a set of separate capabilities. It's very uneven. AI systems are very good at some things, not good at other things. And the things that they're good at sometimes in a different way than we are. So it's very sort of localized and uneven, and to the extent you would call it intelligent, it's not intelligent in the way that we are. And that makes it not only sort of less a single transformative thing, but also intellectually, I think, very interesting, because if it is an intelligence, it's a sort of alien intelligence that's different from ours. And it's really interesting to go from understanding one type of intelligence, sort of, to understanding two.
I want to thank them all in a moment, and I also want to highlight, not embarrass Ed, but just the report that the White House did. Government tends to be very reactive, and so for students here who think about, government trying to think forward about the world that all of you will be adults in, and that even your children will be mastering. It's a really important report, so I also want to thank you specifically as a public policy issue. It's a really important document. And then more generally, I want to thank all of you for this. There's a second part to this, don't worry. We're going to get to questions and answers, so thank you all very much. This can be sometimes the better part of a forum, depending on all of you. So if you have questions for the panelists, please come up to the 4 microphones. Don't be shy. Introduce yourself quickly. Ask a question even faster. And if you want to direct it to someone, great, or we'll try to manage what the response is. So I'll start here.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nico. I'm one of the co-founders of the Future Society and of the AI Initiative, and I'm so delighted that this conversation is taking place, and I hope for many more to come afterwards. My question relates to one of the things we have not addressed today, and there are many, of course, which is computing. The triangle of what we frame as artificial intelligence is meant of machine learning, data, but computing. The idea that our computers are also moving towards delivering more capability at scale. Could you tell us, looking towards the future and towards what people talk about the march towards a general intelligence, what are we supposed to expect in terms of computing being an enabler or a barrier? Are we on for a continuing computing revolution, or is it going to be constrained down the line?
So if I could start, because my group is all 3. So I've got all the IBM Cloud, the IBM Data Business, and Watson together for exactly this reason. I would say we have to make sure computing is not a barrier. 2007 is when Watson won Jeopardy. It's also when AWS was launched, Twitter and Facebook. All these things happened because computing not only became available, but cheap enough. We continue on that curve. The cloud is very important. We've got to put GPU capacity into it. So we've been very focused on the computing, but also the bandwidth, because the computing needs to reach all these things that need to be smarter. So that infrastructure, that computing infrastructure is essential. It's a huge part of where we put our research because it's going to be important. And then I would just lastly say the Internet of Things is very important. You're going to have sensors on everything. You're computing on your watch. We're going to have computers in our glasses. Our cars are going to become computers. Our refrigerators are computers. So all of this computing capacity is going to be essential at the edge, but it's growing volumetric. I mean, beyond geometric. It's really going to grow, and it's necessary to make it happen.
David?
Computer architects are worried that we're seeing an end of Moore's law that has fueled the past 20 plus years of incredible advance in IT. And it means it's a very exciting time to be a computer architect. So my colleague at Harvard Computer Science, David Brooks, he's working on heterogeneous architectures, as are lots of firms, where the idea will be that you'll bake algorithmic techniques onto the chip, and you'll do that in a way because you'll get huge new energy efficiency savings by doing that way. If we want to put a deep net onto a smartphone, which we do, then we want to make sure it doesn't suck up all of your battery power. So I think we're seeing a heterogeneity of architecture developing, and therefore it's an exciting time from a computational perspective as well.
I'm going to move to this. Are you? Yes, in this microphone. You can maybe aim it down.
Okay.
There you go.
Anyway, it's a little too high for me. I'm a neurologist from Taiwan, and I'm interested in the Watson system in IBM. I think Watson did a very good job in the medical system, and there are some news about you can detect the leukemia in Japan. But I'm thinking that if there any possibility that it will take the place of the physician and the whole healthcare system, and who will take the responsibility when it have some bad consequence or the ethical problem.
I think that so the medical department at Watson Health are physicians for a reason. We work a lot with medical programs to make this right. I think it is very important we solve it. On the other hand, what I would say is the average physician does not have enough time. She's seeing patients every 6 minutes. She doesn't have time to process it. So us lifting a lot of efforts off her plate enables her to get to the right answer. Even already the stuff we do in radiology, reading x-rays and MRIs, it helps the radiologists know where they need to focus. 80% of it they don't need to spend their time on. This is where they need to focus. So I think we're creating leverage to happen. That said, I do think we need to augment. I do think we need human involvement. But the trick is how to make them work. Because at the same time, I think there is an ethical responsibility to use the computing. So the other thing, and I can share it because the head of the UNC cardiology department shared this with Charlie Rose on 60 Minutes. When they decided to test the Watson recommendations with the oncologist. What they found is that it largely matched, which was great. What they also found is that Watson 30% of the time gave an additional diagnosis that the humans hadn't found because they couldn't read everything. So we're adding new possibilities to be considered. And I think that's an addition. But I totally do not see a future where you'll go see a robot and it will be done without the doctor. I think that, but I think the doctors are going to have their time freed to solve the tough problems, and the easy stuff can be handled the more mundane stuff can be handled this way.
I'm gonna go up here just because you can't believe the lines.
I'll
here.
see you afterwards.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In the red.
Yes, hi, my name is Mintush and I'm here from the law school. My question is more about relating to human enhancement. So primarily there are two ways to doing that. One is gene alteration, the other way is AIs, I guess, or wearing wearables, these two things. Do you see any overlap between the two? And do you have discussions about the ethical aspects of human enhancement, either through genomes or either through AI alterations?
Roz, you want to take?
Yeah, actually, we've done a lot on human augmentation at the Media Lab, from physical prostheses to emotional and social prostheses, to computer vision ones, the smart glasses that could tell you who that is you're talking to, a decade before Google Glass, actually. So we've thought a lot about that. Combining it with genes is getting a little more interesting when you can start to measure what is turning on and off gene expression, right? And so as we start to measure things going on with your sleep, your stress, your activity, all these things going on in your life, we can start to figure out what's changing your health as, from moment to moment. And then it becomes a different kind of augmentation, right? Like, who do I want to be tomorrow? Not just somebody who slept well, but maybe I want my whole, even parts of me I can't see, to be functioning better. So that's a very exciting frontier.
I'm going to go right up there.
Hi, my name is Colton Goulet. I'm a current undergraduate at the college studying computer science. One thing that I know about when we're training artificial intelligence is that when we provide examples or data, we tend to impart some of our own biases as humans to these machines. My question would be, is this problematic? And if so, what can we do to train artificial intelligences that are free of human biases?
I'm going to turn to Ed.
Is it problematic? Yes. That's the easy part of the question. The hard part of the question, and this is something that does come up, and you see this in a lot of different examples. There are a lot of subtle ways in which bias can get into a data set. And one of the classic ways that can happen is if you're training a system that is supposed to make some decision, and you train it using examples of past decisions made by people, and say, do it like the people did it before, that's what you ask for is what you'll get. And the bias that was in the previous human decisions will be baked right into the algorithm. Now that said, there are things that can be done technically to develop algorithms that are resistant to bias. There are ways of, and there's a whole area of research in AI that goes to this question of how can you, first of all, tell whether your data is biased, or if you worry that your data is biased, how are there algorithms you can use that will give you a result that is fair regardless of that? And there's some really interesting progress toward those goals. So I'm optimistic that in the long run that we'll have a better technical handle on this question, and it will become a best practice on something that responsible engineers feel obliged to do, to take this into account. So that you get to a situation where you want ideal bias-free data, but if you don't have it, you'll have an algorithm that is a lot more resistant to absorbing bias from its inputs.
I think the other thing we have to work on the human side of this is the humans still are going to have their bias. So I actually find the machine models to have less bias. The humans can't let go of it. So I got to this by building basic machine learning for weather models. 70% of the, and we did those on your smartphones, so they had to be my machine because there's 3 billion locations. But people could override them. 70% of the time they override them, they made them worse. We find this in certain discourse today where people don't believe facts anymore they believe their biases more than their facts. So, I mean, we're just seeing this all over the place. So I think the trick here is to make sure that humans actually know how to actually expand beyond their biases, even when the machine algorithms are less biased.
Another question down here.
Yeah, my name is Usman Aziz. I'm actually an advanced analytics consultant with PTC, a competitor of yours, actually. And I'm a little bit...
We like that. Competition's good.
Confused a bit about, so as far as I actually worked in the applied side, so I actually apply these for clients. And IBM in particular, Watson, their engagements in particular require ripping an entire data system apart and starting from scratch. So there seems to be this is the reason why Watson's not able to actually penetrate the market particularly. So is there any discussion, there actually isn't much discussion about the actual reality involved in terms of formatting data, doing joins between various tables, no sense of self-awareness. You know, where we get to data sets, I just got done training a client analog devices, and their main concern is my data is not organized a particular way. What kind of level of granularity should I have my time series data? AI is not capable of answering these things. Human beings are capable of answering these things. And unless you create a structure or framework which is so rigid in the way it collects data, then you have no way of actually creating a use case, which I think is IBM's problem in particular, but not PTC's. But how do you deal with that? How do you deal with self-awareness with regards to data preparation? Because 75% of any learning algorithm is a function of the data that you prep.
So thank you for the feedback.
You can end it there.
I'll talk later about bias versus fact, but
after Tuesday.
Tuesday. No. On his question has nothing to do with Tuesday. On the specifics of data prep, which is an important factor, and it kind of gets to what David was saying about unsupervised learning. There's a lot of effort on being able to find patterns in unstructured data. There's a lot of data that's increasingly being read. It's where we have to go to deeper learning to be able to do that. But I totally don't buy the argument that you've got to get all your data prepped and structured and rules driven, because that really isn't the full potential of AI. And I think we've made the field. I'm going to leave it to the field's continuing to make advances. I do think the unsupervised data, unsupervised learning aspect of this is key. That doesn't mean chaos. That doesn't mean that humans are abandoning responsibility, but it does mean that we're going to let the machine do more of the learning versus do all the structuring for them.
Yeah, so one way to think about the unsupervised learning problem is, let's say I'm trying to build a model that will do object detection in this room. I'm going to build a sequence of layers. The first layer will be bits, which will represent the pixels. The next layer will try to be predictive of the first layer. So the next layer will be edges, let's say. And then the layer after that will try to be predictive of the patterns of edges. So it might build edges that join other edges. And then the layer after that will try to be predictive of the motifs of edges. So it will be little parts of objects. And then the layer after that, in this kind of cascading representation, might represent objects themselves. And these like unsupervised ways where we don't have to feed labels in, and yet we can extract these features automatically, that's really been one of the ways that these advances have really accelerated since around 2006, 2007.
Over here, right here.
Hi, can you hear me? Okay. Hi, I'm Lisa. I am actually on the IBM security team. And so my question centers around the appropriateness when assessing if AI, ML, using neural nets is appropriate to solve a problem. So as common folk today, we hear a lot of startups mentioning these buzzwords of AI, we're using neural nets to solve problems, blah, blah, blah. But there are critics that say maybe using AI and ML is like hitting a fly with a hammer. Whether or not it's because we have a lack of data to really process meaningful insights for a problem, or maybe they prefer like humans to do the same task, whether or not it's in hospitality. So they don't want to have humans being replaced by these solutions. So my question to you guys is, how do you assess whether or not AI is actually appropriate to solve a problem, and when is it not appropriate?
Sure, let me take a cut at that. I think if you have a problem that's defined with a very clear, measurable objective, then you can just ask, does it work? Does it work? Is the machine better than the person at that task? And that might cover a lot of different tasks. It might cover something like driving, where you could ask, Does a machine driver kill fewer people on the highway than a human driver, right? That's a very important question, very important, because 35,000 people die on the highways of the United States every year. But if it's not a measurable goal, then I think people will try different things and competition will sort it out. If a startup has an idea that AI is better than a person at some job and there's a competitor that's using a person, the startup will find out whether the thing they're making is something people want.
I do also have to say you have to look at the curve, because it's getting cheaper and it's getting more effective. So I do think that there's a risk of waiting too late. That there are some things that today it might be equal, or even a little bit more, but you also have to extend where, I mean, that's how you win in tech, is you've got to be somewhat ahead of the curve. So looking at where that could end up in 1, 2, 3, 5 years is also key.
Right. Let's also just be careful about when we say is AI. I mean, there's not one AI. We mean so many different technologies here. So if you have 10 data points, then don't use a deep network, use something else, right? It's using the technology in the right way. And I think there's a lot of misperceptions about what artificial intelligence is, and it's far from being one thing.
That's true.
Up here on the right.
Hi, my name is Richard Kuzma, and I'm a first-year public policy student here at the Kennedy School. My question touches more on national security and lethal autonomous weapon systems. Understanding the ethical concerns that these pose, who are the players that need to take part in the conversation over the ethics of these weapon systems, and how far do they extend outside of maybe the White House, the Pentagon, to other areas, maybe to include the American public?
Sure. So let me talk about that in two respects. First of all, let me talk about what is happening, has been happening within the government, and then let me talk about the broader conversation. Within the government, there are a couple of things that have been going on. First is within the Department of Defense, and DoD has a policy. You can look it up. It's DoD Directive 3000.09 from 2012, which says what is the policy, what are the constraints, what kind of testing, what kind of approvals would be needed for semi-autonomous and autonomous weapons. And there's definitions of all of this. And it's basically designed to ensure that two things. First of all, that the things that the US government and US forces do are always consistent with international humanitarian law. And second, to do that through making sure that there is an appropriate level of human control over weapon systems at all times. And you can go look at that. The other thing that has been happening publicly in the US government about this is that a US delegation led by the Department of State has been involved in international discussions through a forum called CCW, which is convened by the United Nations. The Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons is what that stands for. And those international talks happen, they convene roughly every 6 months, and there has been slow progress in trying to map out what is the space for discussion there. So those things are happening, and in the AI report, the report talks about an interagency process going on within the government to come to a single government-wide policy on this issue. Now, the question of what should the debate be, the debate should be broad. This is something that absolutely affects the public. This is something that technologists and ethicists and lawyers have a lot to say about. And it's entirely appropriate and good that that conversation has been going on and is going on. Certainly, the AI research community on the technical side of things has done a lot of thinking about these issues, and appropriately so.
If I can add to that, and it's one thing to say that the US or the military would have rules, but what rules would you want for, say, a local police department? I mean, as we've seen, this weaponry tends to head down, but that's going to be one, is it may very well be you don't want it at all, just given the expertise or concerns on
You have seen a few examples of local police departments using robots and with potentially lethal or potentially lethal force.
That's right.
That's right. And so you get to the issue of when is it appropriate for a police department to use force. And that, to start with, is difficult. So that's
At least they weren't autonomous.
Right.
Yeah, that's right.
Up here.
Hi, my name is Andreas Rando. I'm a computer scientist. And I have one question. How well do you think are we prepared, like politically? Like how well is the government prepared to deal with the fallout of artificial intelligence? Let's say AI basically figures out a better way for gerrymandering, and basically every single mandate in the country is basically like a secure bet, like for the different parties. Or somebody finds out how to trade commodities, and basically everything is basically just traveling up automatically. How well do you think, and how quickly can we react to those things, and how well do you think the government is actually prepared to deal with these issues?
I guess that's a question for me.
And then, Roz, you could talk about healthcare after. No, Ed, you go first.
Oh, thanks. So this is this basic question was one of the main motivations for the administration to first study AI, and then out of that process to start focusing more on building capacity for understanding and dealing with these questions. It's critical that the agencies that are responsible for understanding and regulating the financial markets, for example, understand what are the implications of the use of AI in those markets. And all across government, there are equities and there are needs to understand and deal well with these things. And so this is part of the broader project of trying to increase the technical capacity of government. And it's an area of focus that we have now, and it's one that we will strongly urge the next administration to continue.
I went this way, right here. Hi.
Hi, my name is Vlada. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the medical school, and my question is a bit low tech, so I apologize for that. I want to piggyback on that analogy of the arms race. I think, what do you think about the idea that the arms race of the future is essentially an arms race to create the more coherent society, the more just society, the more democratic society? Because clearly, nuclear race, for example, we can see that even feudal societies like North Korea can acquire nuclear capacity. And my question is really inspired by the book I was reading recently by Cathy O'Neill, who is a data scientist who wrote the book Weapons of Math Destruction, math as in mathematics. And she describes her difficulty in actually getting access to those programs and algorithms already being used in the government and, for example, in justice system, where the algorithm has been shown to be very biased, racially biased, and sentencing Black Americans to much longer terms in prison. And all that essentially algorithmic work boiled down to essentially race, saying you're more likely to reoffend because of your race. So how do we even inform the public that those algorithms are already being used, they're already impacting lives, and how do we open that discussion to inputs from the parts of the population who might not even know anything about artificial intelligence?
So I don't want to go straight to that question, but let me try to link your question with the last question. So not to speak directly initially to your race question, but I do think that one thing that we all need to be thinking about are, as AI continues to develop, we're going to get, I believe we're going to get AIs that look more rational than people look. And so one reflection then on that is that the economic theories, the mechanism designs, the political science, the game theories that have been developed for 30, 40 years to try to design optimal rules of interaction for the way kind of rational economic actors ought to interact with each other, such that we get nice outcomes, such that we get good outcomes. I believe that these normative designs will be important as a way to say, yes, we believe that now there will be very rational actors everywhere, but what can we do to set the rules up such that they cannot game the system? And there are plenty of examples as to how that can be done. People are asking that question in the financial markets, for example. So I didn't answer your race question directly, but I did want to try to link those two things together.
I would just say the thing we're focused on is transparency. We need to make it clear when a model gives a recommendation that you know why it made it. Today, if you ran a model, and because training data matters, if you asked Watson, based on prior presidents in the United States, who should people vote for, you would say a male, because that's all we've had. And if you said, what's a great global leader, and you train it on all global leaders, you'd have a more robust answer. So it's important. Dubai is doing things about AI to optimize happiness. So solving it is key. I would say on the particular issue of using it in law enforcement, it is used. Smart thinkers are thinking very much about transparency so that you figure out what it was trained on, and if the training is an inherent bias that's not a fact, you have to adjust it.
That is protected by IP, the actual algorithm.
But about sharing the algorithms?
Say, for example, in school teacher assessment programs, the program is actually provided by the private contractor, and the program is owned by a private entity, right? So, like, how do you solve that transparency issue legally?
Yeah, I don't know that specific issue. I do think transparency in algorithms is key.
Okay, I'm fortunate I'm getting the eye over there. This will be our last question, so thank you.
Oh, well, I hope it's a good one. My name is Shalene. My name is Shalene Reiser. I'm with the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society. I work on their youth and media team, so my question is a little bit more tailored to that. Part of the youth and media team, we work a lot with kids and education and talking about their digital literacy. You mentioned earlier, you know, the importance of computer science, but we've also seen in every industrial revolution, there's been drastic changes in not only the access of information, but also in the standard of education and the level of education. So I guess my question is can you tell me what you see happening with education and artificial intelligence?
Well, you know, one very, very positive thing to say is that AI will enable personalized education. So imagine seriously, imagining an AI that knows exactly what you've learned so far, what you're having a hard time with, what you're understanding, and can be with you your whole life. I agree that AI and the effects that AI are going to have on society are going to be large economically, and we're going to need to be reacquiring new skills all the time, relearning, retraining. But I actually do think that AI will be able to help with that. So I'm pretty positive about personalized ed tech.
Last week we had John King, the Secretary of Education, with us because we built a Watson for teachers as a teacher assistant. There's a lot of things that can lift their time. But I do think those of us in the field have to give back to education. We can't advance this without at the same time advancing education. And I applaud your work. I think it's a real moral obligation for the public sector and the private sector.
Whether we're using AI or not in the classroom, we need a lot of skilled teachers who have, especially the training to teach computer science and some of the technical material. So it's a calling for young people. It's also an area in which we can make public investments.
We've also just measured emotion in the classrooms and in learning a lot, and learned things like the state that is most likely to be experienced before learning is actually confusion. And that's actually good to know. So it's not just about engagement and frustration. Eliciting confusion can be important too.
And that's been a relief to a lot of people in the room.
I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative. I should end with a question from someone from the Future Society, and so I'm going to leave it to you for the last question. If you.
So thanks everybody for your presentation. My name's Assam. So I basically see this process of evolution as human beings that we've had to give us a decisive advantage over this planet, over many other species. For example, many species have, physically dominant characteristics like sharper teeth, but we tend to have some decision-making process that gives us a divisive advantage. And so I was hoping that you could talk a little bit about what makes us so special that decisive advantage of being able to solve problems stops at us, or we're not very far on the spectrum. Like, why wouldn't that decisive advantage be able to be in the hands of an artificial intelligence somewhere down the line? And does it really matter how far down the line that is for us to actually think about the unintended consequences and think deeply about how we can avoid those negative situations? Does it matter how far down it is, or should we just kind of like slow down or turn around if we see that that's a potential big thing?
I think you all have to answer that one. That's an excellent question. So,
I think one of the important ideas here is the value of having teamwork between people and AI. And there's lots of examples of this. There's examples, studies in radiology. There's the example of playing chess, where a pretty good person plus a pretty good computer beats the best computer, even though the best computer is way better than anyone else. There's lots of examples where humans and machines can team up and do better than either one alone. And that kind of follows from the fact that what I was talking about before, that if these machines are intelligent, they're intelligent in a somewhat different way than we are. And so they don't necessarily obsolete us. They, I think more that if we use them wisely, they can augment our intelligence and keep us not only on the top of that heap, but even higher than we are now.
So I'm going to steal a little bit from the affective side. I think the emotional aspects of humans are even going to be more important. We tend to talk about intellectual. My wife certainly argues that sometimes I'm so focused on the intellectual, I'm not feeling how she's feeling. Some of you have the same reaction. The more, as we're working with the machines, if the machines can take some of the intellectual stuff off and allow us to add emotional energy to this, we're going to make better and I think more just decisions.
My short answer is to actually point you to another group at Harvard, that came out of Harvard, actually, that has put a lot of videos of conversations about this online. It's called Veritas, V-E-R-I-T-A-S, veritas.org. They've led lots of discussions on this, what makes us human, are we special? Brought in people with different points of view. There's several talks I've given on that on there. And one thing to maybe keep in mind is that while we might use genetic algorithms and algorithms that are inspired by evolution as we build machine learning and AI systems, ultimately we are designing these systems. You can argue whether or not it's intelligent design when we build these systems, but there are humans and minds that are shaping the math and the algorithms, and even if it's a stochastic random process, we're applying the shape of the external field. We're biasing the algorithms. There's a bias in there somewhere, and it comes from a human mind.
I don't believe that the human intelligence is some white line that we won't cross. I don't believe that. I do think, though, there are dangers to taking these scary futuristic visions very seriously now, because they're a distraction to the 50 to 100 years ahead of where we are now, where AI can do so much good if we learn how to harness it in the right way. I mean, it's not at all clear who these AIs of the future are owned by and why they're acting in the way they are, and I just think that I find it to be useful in the sense that it's energized the AI research community. So now we're asking how to formulate the technical question of what does it mean to have value-aligned AI? And it's great that we're asking that question, but I do really want to urge caution in regard to spending too much of our time worrying about this potential future, because I think it's a distraction.
So I want to thank the Institute and the Future Society and all of you and the parents who are here for Parents Weekend. It's worth it, yes? And thank the four of you for an unbelievable discussion about such an important issue. Thank you very much. They're going to all come.